Chlorpyrifos is a broad-spectrum pesticide. As a molecule, it looks a little something like this because science. It's essentially a nerve agent in the same class of chemicals as sarin gas. It can cause nausea and dizziness and confusion. In high doses, it can cause vomiting, convulsions, respiratory arrest, even death. The people who make this pesticide say that in normal low-level doses, it's perfectly safe. Some agricultural experts say the science is not conclusive. Part of why it's so hard to draw a conclusion is because this pesticide is too toxic to be tested on humans. It's already banned from most household uses. But chlorpyrifos is still all over American farms. Around 40,000 U.S. farms use it on dozens of different crops. So a few years ago, the EPA decided to study whether it was still safe to dump all that pesticide into the air and onto our food. And what the EPA found was kind of alarming. They looked at the research that was done at Columbia University, and this was the headline from the Columbia study: "Common pesticide disturbs the brains of children." The EPA came to a similar conclusion. They found that exposure to chlorpyrifos had significant long-term consequences, like declines in learning and memory, especially among people who worked on farms where the pesticide is used. So the EPA suggested banning the use of chlorpyrifos on all food crops, full stop. But that ban never happened because Donald Trump became president. He picked Scott Pruitt to run the EPA, and one of the first things, the very first things that Scott Pruitt did as head of that agency was to kill that ban of the pesticide with the potential to disturb the brains of children. He said there was not enough science to justify a blanket ban, despite what the experts at the EPA had found before he got there. If the Trump administration had not quashed that ban, we would be entering our second year in this country without a drop of that chemical touching our crops. Instead, the pesticide hoses are still on, and the New York Times has done some remarkable reporting on what that looks like for Americans on the ground. Quote, "In May of 2015, Vicenta Rivera was one of the first to feel it. A pesticide drift of chlorpyrifos had been sprayed on a nearby grove of mandarin oranges. There was a strong odor, a taste in the back of the throat, numb lips, itchy skin, and watery eyes. The headache set in quickly. A 37-year-old mother of three remembers the smell, the dizziness, the overwhelming feeling of nausea. Other workers thought she was faking it, trying to be funny, when she hit the ground and started convulsing. When the invisible but toxic cloud of chlorpyrifos arrived, Lucia Montero thought she smelled grease or burned oil, believing it was the tractor. She turned off the engine. Then came the burning, the itching, the nausea. Ms. Montero called the supervisor on her phone, who told her to get her crew out of the field. But by then, several were vomiting. 2 or 3 fainted. The New York Times has just dropped this incredible body of work today, documenting how the Trump administration is unwinding environmental regulations at a breakneck pace. They've documented the effects of those rollbacks, the effects they're having on real people in painstaking detail. And it's not just plumes of pesticides in the California orange fields. Joining us now is Eric Lipton, investigative reporter for the New York Times and one of the reporters responsible for this excellent endeavor. Eric, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
So that was just a little bit of your reporting on the Trump administration not to ban this pesticide, our new spelling bee word of the day, chlorpyrifos. But that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what you all have found in terms of what they're doing in terms of the environment. Can you just give us a few of the highlights or maybe lowlights?
Sure. Well, we've read so much about proposals for changes in environmental rules, but what we found when we went and looked across the United States was that there are real impacts that are happening. For example, in North Dakota, there was a proposal by the Department of Interior to limit the flaring and leaks of natural gas when there's oil and drilling going on. And in North Dakota, there's been a massive increase in the amount of flaring on an Indian reservation there that would have been subject to an Interior Department rule that limited that flaring and those leaks. But the Trump administration basically eliminated all of those limits on flaring. And I went and visited that reservation in November, and you thought the hillsides were on fire. I mean, the flares were burning, everywhere you looked. Hundreds of flares burning. 30% of the natural gas that they produce there is being burned. It's enough to power 600,000 homes per month. It's just being burned into the air. At times, there are chemicals that are leaking that are carcinogens going into the air, and it's an incredible scene. It's quite terrifying, in fact, but this is something that's no longer being regulated by the Department of Interior.
And we know that the Trump administration, that Donald Trump came in touting coal, that he was going to somehow bring back this 19th and 20th century product and make it, profitable again. Talk a little bit about what the administration has been doing on coal in terms of the environment, and has that in fact brought back the industry?
I mean, if there's a single industry that the administration has attempted to help out, it's the coal industry. And of the areas that we looked in both Texas and in West Virginia, we found examples. There's a regulation that's supposed to reduce the toxic metals being released in the rivers in the United States. It was the single biggest source of toxic pollutants going in the rivers. That rule has been delayed. 80 different power plants in the United States are supposed to be upgrading their wastewater treatment programs, that most of which have now stopped the design work on those improvements because of this delay that the EPA put. In Texas, I visited a power plant that was going to have to upgrade its air pollution control system to reduce sulfur dioxide, which is attributed, perhaps 170 deaths a year can be attributed to this plant because of the enormous the amount of sulfur dioxide that it's emitting each year. It's one of the largest sources in the United States. The EPA under Obama said that plant was going to have to install what's called the scrubber to reduce that sulfur dioxide. The Trump EPA says no longer necessary, don't worry about it. There were 9 plants that were going to have to install scrubbers in Texas. Those are no longer going to have to happen. That's another change. But the thing is, both of those were supposed to help the coal industry, but then the Energy Department reported just a couple weeks ago that coal production in the United States declined more last year than it has in decades. So the United States continues to turn away from coal, even though Trump said that he's ending the war on coal.
Wow. Great reporting. Eric Lipton, investigative reporter for the New York Times. I recommend everyone read it. It's sobering reading. But thank you so much for doing that work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we come back, former President Barack Obama on the verge of making history again in a whole new way. And while this is bound to be salt in the wound for one Donald Trump. That's ahead.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.